Imagine being born in a country where the first sound you hear is silence, not the soft hum of machines or the lull of a mother's voice, but the sterile quiet of control. In North Korea, that silence is deliberate. It is the sound of a system that does not allow crying, does not allow questions, and does not allow dreams. Inside the orphanages scattered across the nation, some hidden deep in the countryside, others in the shadow of Pyongyang's glittering facades, children learn this silence before they learn to speak. These are not orphanages in the traditional sense. They are institutions designed to mold obedience, erase individuality, and breed loyalty to a portrait that hangs on every wall. The portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il watch over them like gods in a pantheon of control. The children look up, but never down. They learn to bow, not to embrace. From the outside, these orphanages are often presented to visiting foreigners as models of socialist compassion: clean uniforms, smiling children reciting songs about the leader, food on the table. The camera captures the illusion, the performance meticulously rehearsed. But once the doors close, the reality resumes. The air inside smells of disinfectant and neglect. The children sleep in rows side by side under thin blankets that hide the trembling of hunger. Some are orphans of war. Others are not orphans at all, just children whose parents were taken to labor camps for political crimes, their offspring deemed tainted by association. They are taught that their parents betrayed the motherland, that love for them is treason, and so they grow up believing they owe everything, not to family, not to themselves, but to the supreme leader who claims to have given them life anew. Imagine being 5 years old and reciting lines about dying for someone you've never met. The words become a kind of lullaby. You repeat them until they no longer sound strange. They tell you that outside the borders of your country, monsters live. Americans, South Koreans, Japanese, creatures who want to destroy you. And you believe it because you have never seen anything else. The orphanage is a microcosm of North Korea itself, controlled, surveilled, and isolated. Every child has a role, every movement is monitored. Older children report on younger ones. Trust does not exist. Friendship is risky. Even affection is rationed. The caregivers, if that word can be used, are not chosen for their kindness, but for their loyalty to the regime. They are indoctrinators as much as attendants. They teach songs of gratitude before they teach arithmetic. They recite the 10 principles for the establishment of the one ideology system before teaching how to hold chopsticks. Food becomes a tool of obedience. Meals are rewards for compliance, withheld for infractions as minor as speaking out of turn. The younger ones learn early that silence is survival. The hunger becomes a constant companion, reshaping their minds, dulling rebellion into fatigue. At night, when the power cuts out, as it often does, the dormitories fall into darkness. You can hear the faint whispers of children talking about food they've never tasted, dreams they barely remember. And in the distance, through cracked windows, sometimes they hear the faint echo of propaganda music, melancholy melodies praising eternal leaders, drifting from loudspeakers across the hills. Some of the children try to hum along in their sleep, as if the music could comfort them. But there is no comfort here. In winter, the cold is unbearable. Windows are sealed with plastic sheets, and frost paints the walls. The children wrap their hands inside their sleeves, their lips cracked and blue. They are told the cold builds character, that the great leader endured worse. The regime's mythology seeps into every crevice of their lives. There are stories of Kim Il-sung as a child, fighting tigers with his bare hands, of Kim Jong-il writing operas before he turned 10. The children are made to memorize these tales as if they were gospel, believing that greatness runs in the bloodline of their rulers. They repeat it daily, their young voices echoing through empty halls like a choir of devotion. Yet beneath the recitations there are cracks. Some children stare too long out the window. Others ask forbidden questions. Why don't we see birds anymore? Why is there never enough rice? Where did my mother go? Those who ask too much disappear for days. When they return, they do not speak. They simply eat quietly, eyes lowered, as though part of them never came back. In these orphanages, punishment is not just physical, it is psychological. A child who cries is made to stand before the portrait of the leader and confess their weakness aloud. A child caught hoarding food is forced to explain why they were selfish in front of the others. The message is constant: you are nothing without the regime. The only love that matters is the leader's love. But love here is an abstract concept wrapped in fear. The children are taught to thank the leader for the rice they never see, for the warmth they never feel, for the family they lost. Every expression of gratitude becomes an act of survival, a shield against suspicion. The older they grow, the more they learn to perform that gratitude with precision. Smiles become masks. Tears are practiced only when required. There is a ceremony each week where the children must write letters of thanks to the supreme leader. The letters are dictated by the teachers, full of words the children barely understand. They write about their health, their happiness, their education, none of which are real. The letters are collected and never sent. They exist only to remind the children that their existence is a gift from someone above them. The irony is cruel. Many of these orphanages are located in rural provinces where famine has struck hardest. The officials who oversee them often siphon the food supplies for themselves, selling aid on the black market, while the children survive on watery porridge and corn husks. Malnutrition leaves their faces swollen and their bodies stunted. The regime blames foreign sanctions, but within the walls, the children learn a different truth, one that cannot be spoken. They see who eats first. They know who gets the extra bowl of rice. They know that loyalty feeds you, and silence keeps you alive. Occasionally, foreign visitors are allowed to tour select orphanages, always the same few, always perfectly staged. The children are dressed in clean uniforms, rehearsed to sing patriotic songs. The classrooms are stocked with new books, borrowed from local schools for the occasion. Cameras roll and the world sees what it is meant to see. Happy children praising their country. Afterward, the visitors leave gifts, candies, notebooks, sometimes dolls, and the regime takes them away as soon as the gates close. The children never see them again. The performance resets for the next inspection. But behind the facade, the real orphanages rot in neglect. Disease spreads easily. Tuberculosis, malnutrition, and infections are common. Medical supplies are non-existent. A scrape on the knee can turn deadly. The teachers are often powerless, too fearful to ask for more resources. They know that complaints are seen as criticism of the state, and criticism is treason. So they stay silent, just like the children. Silence becomes the national language. The few who escape describe these places as factories of ghosts. They speak of children so malnourished they could not stand during roll call, of infants abandoned in freezing rooms, of older ones disappearing overnight, taken to labor camps once they were old enough to work. The orphanage is not the end. It is the beginning of another kind of servitude. Those who survive long enough are often sent to factories, mines, or military camps. The girls are assigned to loyalty brigades, performing manual labor in the name of the regime. The boys are taught discipline through drills, preparing to serve in an army that will never question its purpose. The system recycles them into cogs before they reach adulthood. A few, the fortunate, are chosen for propaganda roles, paraded as model citizens. They appear on state television, smiling, singing, thanking the leader for saving them. The irony is unbearable. The same system that starved them now showcases them as proof of its compassion. And yet, somewhere inside that performance, there lingers a spark, a memory of hunger, of loss, of something that once felt like love. That spark is dangerous. It is what drives some of them, years later, to escape. The stories that reach the outside world are rare, but they carry the weight of thousands of silenced voices. One former orphan recalled the moment she first saw real fruit after crossing the border into China. She wept uncontrollably, not from hunger, but because she realized how much she had been lied to. "We were told the outside world was dying," she said. "But I was the one who had been dying." These stories spread quietly among defectors, piecing together a mosaic of suffering that the regime denies exists. Each testimony becomes a fragment of forbidden truth, a truth that paints a picture of orphanages not as shelters but as instruments of control. And still the regime continues its show. State media releases footage of smiling children playing with new toys, thanking their dear Marshal Kim Jong-un. The narrative is carefully crafted. North Korea, the land of benevolence, But behind the screen, the cycle of neglect continues. Children born into poverty, into punishment, into silence. The walls of those institutions are high, not just to keep outsiders from looking in, but to keep the truth from escaping. Yet sometimes at night, when the guards grow tired and the power fails, a strange thing happens. The children whisper stories to each other. They invent families they never had, fathers who are fishermen, mothers who sing lullabies. They talk about crossing rivers, about stars beyond the mountains. Even without knowing what freedom is, they dream of it. The human spirit, it seems, resists even the most perfect systems of control. In the silence of those orphanages, the smallest defiance is to dream. And though the regime may not hear it, the whispers persist, carried by wind and memory, beyond the walls, beyond the 38th parallel, into the conscience of a world that too often chooses not to listen. The streets of Pyongyang are immaculate, swept daily, spotless as if untouched by dust. But a few kilometers away, hidden beyond the capital's prideful facade, there are buildings with barred windows and grey concrete walls where laughter has been erased from existence. Inside these walls, the second stage of indoctrination begins. The orphans are older now, 7, 8, 10 years old, and they no longer cry when someone disappears. They've learned to look away. The orphanage is not only their home, it is their entire world. A world without mirrors, without questions, without color. Everything that could reflect individuality has been removed. The children are told that they are part of a great organism, the living body of the nation, and that any weakness within them is a disease against it. It is here that the lessons deepen, transforming fear into loyalty, and loyalty into faith. Mornings start with a siren, followed by hymns to the supreme leader. The children line up, their breaths visible in the cold, and bow 3 times toward the portraits on the wall. Their voices rise in unison, singing about eternal devotion, their words heavy with reverence they barely understand. Our father Kim Il-sung, our teacher Kim Jong-il, our protector Kim Jong-un. Each name is a prayer, each syllable a survival mechanism. It is not enough to obey. You must feel. You must appear to love. The punishment for insufficient emotion is public shame. And so, they learn to weep on command, to smile when told, to embody sincerity even when their hearts have forgotten how. A woman in her 40s, once an instructor in one of these institutions, later defected to the south. Her testimony paints the picture with chilling precision. They told us, she said, that the orphans were the children of the revolution, born without parents, because the nation itself was their mother. She described how the staff were forbidden from showing affection, no hugs, no lullabies, no kindness that could create attachment. The state feared love that competed with devotion to the leader. When a child cried for their mother, they were told, "The leader is your mother." And if they continued crying, food was withheld until they stopped. We were taught, she said, to feed their loyalty before their hunger. Imagine the slow erosion of childhood that takes place under those conditions. Imagination fades first, then laughter, then trust. The children become small replicas of the propaganda posters on the walls, wide-eyed, solemn, expressionless. They are taught to read from early primers, filled not with fairy tales but with stories of military heroism and sacrifice. One lesson tells of a young boy who saved his comrades by throwing himself on a grenade, another of a girl who reported her parents for criticizing the leader. These tales are morality plays with a single message: loyalty is worth more than life, and betrayal is punished beyond death. The instructors know the power of hunger, of repetition, of fear. Every reward, from food to praise, is tied to ideological correctness. When the state runs out of supplies, which happens often, the teachers improvise with illusion. Imagine rice, they say. Imagine meat. They tell the children that hunger is a test of faith, that the leader is watching their endurance. Those who faint during class are not pitied. They are blamed for weakness. And yet, behind closed doors, some instructors secretly save crumbs for the smallest ones, risking everything for an act of silent humanity. In a system built on surveillance, kindness itself becomes subversive. There are tears within these orphanages, The so-called revolutionary orphans, whose parents died serving the regime, are sometimes given slightly better treatment, extra rations, warmer clothes. They are paraded on national holidays as symbols of the regime's care. The others, the hostile class, whose parents were executed or imprisoned for political crimes, exist as reminders of impurity. These children are considered stains on the national fabric, destined to labor, never to rise. The state uses them to illustrate what disobedience breeds. Even among the innocent, hierarchy divides survival. In the winter of 1997, during the Great Famine, thousands of these orphans simply vanished. Their deaths were unrecorded, their names erased. Locals still whisper about the trains that left in the night, carriages filled with children sent to rural camps under the pretense of relocation. Few were ever seen again. The government blamed the arduous march, a phrase meant to evoke heroic endurance rather than starvation, but witnesses tell of bodies buried behind orphanages, shallow graves covered by snow. There were no funerals, only silence. They told us, one survivor said, that those who died had gone to serve the leader in the afterlife. To understand North Korean orphanages, one must understand the psychology of the regime. The orphan is the perfect citizen, malleable, dependent, and unrooted. Without parents, there is no competing loyalty, no private truth. Every attachment is redirected toward the state. The child grows up believing that survival itself is a privilege granted by the leader. This conditioning is not accidental. It is strategic. The government uses orphanages as ideological laboratories, testing how early indoctrination can shape unbreakable obedience. By the time these children reach adolescence, they no longer need guards to watch them. Their own minds have become the prison. Daily life follows a rhythm of mechanical precision. At dawn, collective exercise in the courtyard. At 8, lessons on revolutionary history. At noon, a meager meal of corn porridge. In the afternoon, labor, cleaning, sewing, tending to the small vegetable patches meant to supplement their rations. In the evening, ideological study, films of the leader visiting factories, speeches about loyalty, drawings of the national flag. Every weekends with self-criticism sessions. Each child must stand before the group and confess their failures, real or imagined. They must apologize for impure thoughts, for not working hard enough, for not loving the leader completely. Then they must criticize others. It is a ritual that destroys trust and ensures that everyone fears everyone else. The teachers record everything. The files follow the children throughout their lives. A single remark of disobedience can mark someone for life, determining whether they will ever be allowed to live in a city, marry, or attend school. The system of classification, songbun, extends even here. An orphan's fate is written not by what they do, but by who their parents were, or what crime the state decided they committed. They carry invisible chains long after they leave the orphanage. Even if they survive, they are branded. But some still dream. One former orphan recalled sneaking into the courtyard at night, staring at the stars, wondering if her mother could see the same sky. "I didn't know where she was," she said, "but I thought maybe if I looked long enough, we were together." That simple act of imagination was rebellion. To dream of someone outside the leader's reach is an act of defiance in a country that punishes hope. She was caught once and beaten for bourgeois sentimentality. The teacher told her, "There is no heaven above you, only the leader's love." Yet she kept looking at the sky whenever she could. Years later, when she escaped across the river to China, she said it was that same memory of the stars that guided her path. The outside world occasionally catches glimpses of these orphanages through smuggled photographs or rare defector accounts. What emerges is a portrait of cruelty disguised as care. In one image, a group of children sits at wooden desks, their faces expressionless, their eyes hollow. On the wall behind them, a banner reads, "We have nothing to envy." The phrase, repeated endlessly in North Korea, has become both mantra and irony. These children have nothing because they are taught to envy nothing. Their deprivation is rebranded as virtue, their suffering as sacrifice. Every few years, the government organizes grand performances featuring orphaned children. They dance, sing, and smile before the cameras, wearing bright costumes under stage lights. The audience applauds, foreign dignitaries nod, and the state media proclaims proof of socialist paradise. But behind the curtain, the same children collapse from exhaustion. The choreography of propaganda demands perfection. Mistakes are not tolerated. A single misstep can lead to punishment, not only for the performer, but for the entire orphanage. To fail is to shame the leader. And so they rehearse until their bodies ache, until obedience becomes muscle memory. There is a cruel genius to it. The regime does not need walls to contain them. It needs rituals. Every act of life, from brushing teeth to saluting the flag, is woven into the fabric of ideology. The orphanage is where that weaving begins. What the rest of the world calls childhood, North Korea calls preparation. Preparation for work, for war, for loyalty. It is a system that has no room for wonder. And yet, within that grey uniformity, small acts of resistance survive. A teacher who sneaks an extra spoonful of rice. A child who hides a pebble under their pillow, pretending it's a gift from their mother. Another who draws a bird in the margin of their notebook, though birds have long disappeared from their village. These gestures, insignificant in scale, are immense in meaning. They are proof that humanity refuses to die, even in the coldest soil. Outside, the world continues to debate sanctions, diplomacy, and nuclear weapons, while the smallest citizens of the regime starve in silence. International organizations send aid, but much of it never reaches the orphanages. Corruption intercepts it halfway. On paper, the government reports success. Children well fed, educated, loyal. In reality, the orphans remain invisible, reduced to statistics that vanish in the glow of parades and speeches. The few who escape carry memories like scars. They describe the moment they realized the world was larger than they were told. The shock of color after years of gray, the taste of sugar, the sound of laughter that wasn't forced. Some cannot adapt. The guilt of survival haunts them. The knowledge that their friends, their childhood companions, still live within those walls. They speak softly, as though afraid their words might still be heard across the border. For them, the orphanage is not a building, but a ghost that follows everywhere. It lives in their habits, the way they hide food, the way they flinch at sudden noise, the way they distrust kindness. It takes years to unlearn fear, and some never do. Yet their stories matter, because they reveal what the regime cannot erase. The truth that even in the most controlled environment on Earth, humanity persists, fragile but unbroken. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the frozen rivers and the electric fences, another orphan wakes up. The same songs play through the speakers, the same portraits watch from the wall. But perhaps tonight, that child will also look at the stars and wonder. That quiet act, invisible to the world, is how the cracks begin to form. The system fears such thoughts more than any weapon, because within the whisper of a single dream lies the seed of everything it cannot control. Beyond the barbed fences of those institutions, the regime pretends there is nothing to hide. Yet every brick of every orphanage holds a story that was meant to disappear. In North Korea, the walls themselves are witnesses, silent, cracked, absorbing the echoes of small footsteps and stifled sobs. When the foreign visitors come, the government repaints those walls, fills the rooms with laughter rehearsed by the hour, and replaces the usual silence with songs of devotion. For a brief moment, the illusion gleams. Then, as soon as the guests leave, the music stops, the smiles fade, and the performance ends. What remains is the raw truth, one the world rarely sees, because to see it would be to confront something unbearable. A childhood stripped of innocence by design. The children who live in these orphanages are invisible in every sense. Their names never appear in newspapers, their birthdays never celebrated, their futures predetermined. They are state property, raised not for love but for loyalty. Many of them never even know their real surnames. They are assigned collective names, often referencing revolutionary heroes. The message is clear. Individuality is weakness. To be anonymous is to be safe. The state becomes their parent, their god, their judge. And in this twisted equation, obedience replaces affection. Inside the dormitories, the atmosphere is one of quiet endurance. The rooms are dim, the air heavy with dampness. The smell of boiled corn lingers for days. Beds are narrow, shared by 2 or 3 children. There are no personal possessions, no photographs, no keepsakes, no reminders of life before the orphanage. Even language is stripped of intimacy. The children address one another by numbers or by assigned titles. The few words of affection they know are reserved for the leader. "Thank you, dear father," they say, before eating, before sleeping, before being punished. Gratitude becomes reflex, not emotion. The daily routine is calibrated to destroy spontaneity. The morning begins before dawn with collective chanting. Then comes the inspection. Nails trimmed, hair-length uniform, clothes clean, posture correct. Any deviation is reported. Older children act as monitors, writing down who failed to smile during the anthem or who seemed tired during recitations. The reports are reviewed by instructors who, in turn, must prove their loyalty by demonstrating vigilance. The entire system feeds on surveillance, turning even playtime into an exercise in control. When play is permitted, it takes a peculiar form. There are no toys, only improvised objects. A stone becomes a ball, a stick becomes a rifle. Their games mimic war. Enemy and soldier, traitor and hero. The children yell the slogans they've been taught, cheering imaginary victories over invisible foes. Laughter in these moments sounds forced, echoing strangely against the concrete walls. Yet within that play, something human tries to survive. You can see it in the fleeting smiles, in the way a child glances over their shoulder before letting themselves laugh for real. A small rebellion against uniformity. Food remains the most powerful currency. Those who perform well during ideological sessions receive extra portions. Those who falter lose them. Hunger becomes both punishment and teacher. It teaches obedience, gratitude, silence. When aid packages arrive from abroad, bags of rice, canned food, powdered milk, the best portions are quietly set aside for the staff or sold in the black market. The children see this, but learn to pretend they do not. They know that noticing too much is dangerous. They eat what's left slowly as if afraid to finish. The caretakers themselves are often trapped. Some are widows, others party loyalists assigned to serve the regime. Many joined with good intentions, believing they were helping children of the revolution, only to discover the brutality of the system they serve. But by then, it's too late. To leave would be to confess disloyalty. They too must survive through performance, smiling for officials, punishing those they secretly pity. At night, when the lights go out, some of them cry quietly. Others pray not to any god but to silence itself, asking only that tomorrow be gentler. Every orphanage has a small room at the end of the corridor, locked most of the time. The children know it well. They call it the room of reflection. Those who are sent there often return changed, or not at all. It is where disobedience is corrected through discipline, a word that hides cruelty beneath bureaucracy. Beatings are common, but the more insidious punishment is isolation. A child left alone for days, fed only water, learns to fear not pain, but absence. Some begin to hallucinate the voices of their mothers calling them. When they are finally released, they thank their captors for re-educating them. The system has achieved what it wanted, gratitude through suffering. Outside the capital, the orphanages grow harsher. In remote provinces like Ryangang and North Hamgyong, winters stretch endlessly, temperatures dropping below -20. The buildings are barely heated. Children sleep fully clothed, huddled together for warmth. Frost forms on the walls and the sound of coughing never stops. Disease moves quickly here. Tuberculosis, rashes, malnutrition, they spread unchecked. There are no doctors, only nurses trained to report deaths as natural causes. The graves outside these orphanages are shallow, unmarked. Sometimes, when spring comes, the thaw reveals what was buried hastily under snow. The world knows fragments of this reality through defectors' testimonies. One man who once delivered food supplies to an orphanage near Hisan later told investigators, "There were no sounds, just eyes. Hundreds of eyes staring at me as I carried sacks of corn. They didn't run, didn't shout, didn't smile. They just watched as if afraid that any movement might cost them the meal." He said he had never seen hunger that quiet. Another defector, a woman who worked in a facility for infants, described how they were told not to comfort crying babies because it made them weak. She said, "They would stop crying eventually. That was how we knew they had learned obedience." Psychologists who've studied survivors say many of them struggle to understand the concept of family even after escaping. Love feels foreign, trust impossible. Some flinch when touched, others hoard food even when surrounded by abundance. Their sense of identity is fragmented. They were never allowed to develop one. The state replaced the family with ideology, and ideology cannot nurture. It can only command. At the heart of this machinery lies the belief that emotion is a resource the regime must monopolize. Love must flow upward, never sideways. The orphanages are laboratories where this experiment begins. If a child can be taught to love the leader more than their own reflection, the regime has secured another loyal citizen. If that love can survive starvation and cruelty, then it becomes faith, and faith is the most efficient form of control. Every now and then a foreign aid worker or diplomat glimpses the truth. They notice the thinness of the children's arms, the mechanical nature of their smiles, the way they flinch when adults raise their hands. Some try to ask questions, but the interpreters deflect with practiced ease. They are shy, they say. They are disciplined. The visitors nod, perhaps uneasy, but unwilling to challenge the narrative. They leave with photographs of smiling faces, unaware or unwilling to believe that behind those faces are children who have forgotten what it means to smile freely. In 2013, satellite images revealed the construction of new state care facilities near military zones. The regime claimed they were for orphans of patriotic soldiers. Analysts, however, noticed something disturbing. These compounds had perimeter walls and watchtowers, orphanages designed like prisons. Inside, the next generation of citizens is being shaped, not raised but forged, as if the state were crafting weapons out of innocence. Each child is taught the same story. The world is dangerous. The leader is merciful, and their suffering is proof of their purity. Yet in the cracks of that narrative, something uncontrollable persists, the human longing for connection. Even the most broken children find ways to express it, through small acts of tenderness, through the sharing of crumbs, through whispered lullabies remembered from a mother's voice they can barely recall. One defector spoke of a girl who sang quietly every night, an old folk song forbidden in the orphanage. She sang to herself, too softly for others to hear, believing her mother could somehow sense her voice across the mountains. Years later, that same girl would escape to China, carrying that song in her memory like a fragile thread tying her to who she once was. These fragments of humanity terrify the regime more than any political dissent, because they prove that even under absolute control, the soul resists. It resists indoctrination, fear, and isolation. It seeks love, and love, in its purest form, cannot be commanded, it must be given. That truth is the greatest threat to tyranny. As night falls over the orphanages, the loudspeakers go silent. The children lie still in the dark, staring at ceilings that leak when it rains. Somewhere beyond those walls, the rest of the country sleeps beneath the same stars. The borders remain sealed, the rivers patrolled, the propaganda blaring. But inside those children something flickers, a quiet, stubborn awareness that the world cannot be as small as they were told. They do not have the words for it yet, but one day one of them will find a way to name it. And when that happens, when a single child dares to imagine a life beyond obedience, that will be the beginning of a different kind of revolution. One born not of ideology or force, but of something far more dangerous to a system built on control, the rediscovery of the self. The night grows colder. The dormitories fall silent once more. Only the wind moves through the cracks, carrying faint whispers, memories, prayers, songs that refuse to die. They rise beyond the orphanage walls, travel across the border, and vanish into the vastness of the dark, unseen but alive. It is there in that invisible space between silence and survival that the truth of North Korea's orphanages still breathes, waiting for the world to finally listen. The first thing that strikes you when you see them, if you ever do, is how small they look, smaller than their age should allow. Years of malnutrition compress the body, stunt growth, dull the eyes. But it's the expression that stays with you. Not sadness, not fear, something emptier. The look of a child who has learned that hope is a dangerous thing to hold on to. Inside North Korea's network of orphanages, children learn that lesson early. Hope, like hunger, must be managed, suppressed, disciplined. It's the state's most dangerous enemy, and so it's crushed quietly, systematically, until it stops growing. In the propaganda films shown to citizens, orphanages are symbols of compassion. They are the regime's proof that no child is forgotten, that the dear leader is both father and savior. The camera moves slowly across rows of smiling faces as a narrator speaks of the boundless love of Marshal Kim Jong-un. The message is simple. Even those without parents are not without family, but off-camera, those same children live under a form of discipline more intense than any prison. They are raised to be tools, future workers, soldiers, and loyalists whose affection has been redirected away from blood and toward power. The education they receive is less about knowledge than about ritual. Arithmetic lessons are interrupted by oaths of allegiance. History is rewritten until it no longer resembles truth. Geography maps end at the border, as though the world simply stops beyond the Korean peninsula. When teachers describe South Korea or the United States, it's through the language of monsters. "There are children like you there," one defector recalled being told, "but they are hungry, homeless, and dying because their leaders are evil." For a child who has never seen television beyond propaganda, who has never met a foreigner or read an uncensored book, that narrative becomes reality. This rewriting of the world is so complete that even the idea of escape feels impossible. Many orphans grow up believing that the entire planet outside North Korea is a wasteland, bombed and burning. The rivers at the border are described as poisonous. The mountains beyond them are said to be haunted by ghosts of traitors. The system depends on fear, and fear depends on ignorance. When knowledge is forbidden, imagination is the last form of rebellion, and that too is slowly starved. Sometimes the regime uses orphanages for more than indoctrination. They become labor hubs, supplying cheap workers to nearby factories or farms. Children as young as 10 are sent to pick corn, shovel coal, or clean streets. They are told it is an honor to serve, that every grain of rice they collect is a gift to the leader. The work is grueling, often without proper food or rest. Accidents happen, but there are no reports, no compensation. A child who collapses is quietly replaced by another. The machine keeps running, and yet amid this machinery, stories of compassion still surface, fragile and rare. One woman who worked as a nurse in a northern orphanage described sneaking extra food to a boy who reminded her of her own son lost during the famine. She knew it was dangerous. Kindness always is in a system that depends on fear, but she did it anyway. "He used to look at me," she said, with a question in his eyes. "He didn't know what love was, but I think he could feel it." The boy disappeared a month later, transferred to a factory school. She never saw him again. But years later, after defecting, she still remembered his face when he ate the stolen rice, half joy, half disbelief. The state's greatest success is not in making people believe lies, but in teaching them not to care whether something is true. That lesson begins in the orphanages. When a child's entire life is filtered through propaganda, truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is survival. You repeat the songs. You bow to the portraits, you say the right words. You do not ask why. Truth becomes a luxury for those who are full, who are safe, who can afford to think. In North Korea, orphans are denied even that luxury. For the regime, these children are the blank pages on which the story of loyalty is written anew. When they reach adolescence, some are sent to specialized schools, so-called revolutionary training centers, where they are molded into model citizens. These centers are worse than the orphanages. The routine is militarized, 5 a.m. drills, endless political study, and strict emotional surveillance. The instructors are officers in all but name. Smiles are measured. Enthusiasm is mandatory. A student who fails to show enough passion during morning chants can be accused of ideological deviation. The punishment is swift: isolation, public humiliation, or reassignment to labor camps. Others are less fortunate. They are sent directly to mines, textile factories or construction sites. Their wages, if they exist, are seized by the state. They work long hours under slogans painted on walls. We have nothing to envy. Let us live like heroes. The irony is cruel and deliberate. Those who grew up in orphanages rarely live past 40. Malnutrition, exhaustion, and untreated disease claim most long before old age. But the regime does not see them as losses. They are considered spent tools, useful until broken. Foreign governments and aid organizations have tried for decades to reach these children. Food shipments, medical supplies, educational materials, all filtered through the regime. Some reach their destinations, most don't. The aid becomes currency in the black market, traded by officials for personal gain. Even the few who deliver help often do so unknowingly to the wrong hands. Inside the country, the regime uses the presence of aid as propaganda, proof that the world fears and respects them. The orphanages, meanwhile, remain invisible. Occasionally, a foreign journalist or diplomat is granted access to a model orphanage. Everything is carefully staged. The children's uniforms are clean, their hair is combed. The classrooms are decorated with new posters and fresh paint. There is always music playing, soft, cheerful, repetitive. The visitors are shown children eating rice and vegetables, reading textbooks, smiling at their teachers. They ask polite questions, and the interpreter answers with precision. They are happy. They love our country. They love the leader. Cameras flash, the visitors nod, and then they leave, satisfied that they have seen compassion where there is only choreography. But sometimes truth escapes through accidents, an unplanned gesture, an unguarded look. One visitor once recalled a child in such a presentation who, while singing a patriotic song, quietly fainted from hunger. The officials rushed to cover it up, claiming heat exhaustion. The performance continued. But that image of a child collapsing mid-praise captures everything the regime tries to hide. The fragility behind the facade. There's another layer of darkness rarely spoken of. What happens to the orphans who are born to women in political prison camps? These children are not even registered. They grow up behind barbed wire, hidden from all records, raised as if they were mistakes to be erased. Many are taken from their mothers immediately after birth. The mothers return to labor, the infants to overcrowded nurseries with almost no medical care. Survivors speak of rows of cribs filled with motionless bodies, of nurses who no longer counted how many died each week. These are the ghost children, the ones even North Korea denies exist. A handful of them survive long enough to be transferred to civilian orphanages, where their origins are erased. They are told their parents were heroes, their birth a gift to the nation. But the trauma lingers. The instinct to cry, to reach for a mother's warmth, fades early. One defector, who had grown up as one of these unregistered orphans, said, "I thought everyone in the world was born without parents. I didn't understand the word family until I escaped." That realization of what the world had stolen from him broke him more than hunger ever did. Despite everything, a small number of these orphans managed to cross the border into China. Their journey is perilous. They hide during the day, travel by night, beg or steal for food. Many are caught and sent back, condemned to labor camps. Those who make it find themselves in another kind of limbo. In China, they are stateless, unrecognized, hunted. Without documents or protection, they become invisible once again, survivors of one prison trapped in another. Some are rescued by missionaries or humanitarian networks, smuggled into South Korea, where they face yet another challenge, learning to live without fear. In Seoul, there are organizations that help North Korean defectors rebuild their lives. But even among them, former orphans struggle the most. They find it hard to make friends, to trust, to sleep. They hoard food, wake up at the sound of footsteps and stare at portraits as if expecting orders. They are haunted by habits that once kept them alive. And yet slowly some begin to heal. They discover colors, music, laughter that isn't choreographed. One woman, now in her 30s, said she still prays every night before eating, but now she prays for the children who remained behind. "I want them to know," she said, "that there is a world where people eat because they are hungry, not because they obey." Her words reveal something profound, the persistence of compassion even after everything has been taken. The state can starve the body, chain the mind, and erase the past, but it cannot completely kill empathy. That is why, even today, the whispers continue. Smuggled testimonies, secret footage, fleeting radio broadcasts, tiny lights flickering through the cracks of isolation, each one a fragment of truth escaping the walls that were meant to contain it. And so, the dark truth about North Korea's orphanages isn't just about hunger or neglect. It's about erasure of identity, of love, of the right to dream. These institutions are not homes, but mechanisms, not shelters, but tools. They produce not children, but instruments of obedience. Yet in their attempt to create perfect loyalty, the regime has also created something it cannot control, the memory of kindness, the echo of love, the whisper of freedom. It starts small. A song hummed at night, a story shared in secret, a gaze that lingers too long on the stars. These are the beginnings of memory, and memory is dangerous because it keeps alive the possibility of another world. Somewhere in the darkness, another child lies awake, wondering why they feel something they cannot name. That feeling, unseen, unrecorded, is hope. And though the state cannot see it, hope grows in silence, waiting for the day it will finally be heard. There is a silence in North Korea that no microphone can record. It isn't the silence of peace, but of erasure, an enforced stillness that seeps into the bones of every child born inside its borders. It's the silence of orphanages after midnight, when even the wind seems afraid to move, when the portraits on the wall appear to watch rather than decorate. It's the silence of thousands of small hearts beating quietly in obedience, waiting for a life that never begins. To understand the tragedy of these places, one must see beyond the walls and numbers. For decades, the regime has presented its orphanages as proof of national strength, but what they truly reveal is fragility. The fragility of a system that must raise its children on fear to ensure its survival. Every uniform, every bow, every chant hides a truth that terrifies the architects of power, that love cannot be engineered. The orphans who survive to adulthood often carry no memories of affection, no photographs, no family names. When they leave, many are given assignments in factories or construction sites, their records sealed and rewritten. The state tells them who they are and what they owe. They are, in essence, citizens without pasts, souls without roots. They are told this is strength, that detachment is purity. But inside they know the hollowness of that claim. They have seen too many disappear to believe in permanence. They have watched friends die of hunger one day and be replaced the next without a word. In their world, grief is forbidden, mourning is rebellion. And yet, somehow, fragments of humanity endure. A stolen moment of laughter, a shared crust of bread, a hand held in the dark during a storm. These moments are not grand, but they are everything. They are proof that even in a system built to erase feeling, the human instinct to care persists. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, almost invisible. But it's there, an ember that refuses to die. When defectors speak of their childhoods, what emerges is not just horror, but confusion. "I didn't know I was suffering," one said. "I thought that was life." They describe a childhood without stories, without songs of love, without the word why. They grew up in a vacuum where every thought was shaped by propaganda, where curiosity was a crime. It's only after escaping that they realize how much was stolen, not just food or comfort, but the right to wonder. One defector, a woman who escaped at 19, once stood before an audience in Seoul and said, "In the orphanage, they taught us that the leader gave us everything. But when I saw the sky for the first time outside North Korea, I realized the sky belonged to no one." The audience wept. She didn't. Her voice was calm, steady, like someone describing a wound that had already scarred. She wasn't asking for pity. She was bearing witness. Bearing witness is itself an act of defiance, because for every story told, there are 100 that will never be heard. The regime relies on that imbalance, the world's limited attention, the fatigue of compassion. North Korea's greatest weapon is not its missiles, but its invisibility. The orphanages are hidden behind parades, behind slogans, behind a curtain of forced smiles that the international community too often accepts as truth. To look beyond that curtain requires more than outrage. It requires endurance, the same endurance the orphans have learned in silence. But there is another side to this silence, one that belongs to the world outside, a silence of complicity. The global community knows, but knowing has never been enough. Reports are written, testimonies recorded, conferences held. Then attention fades, replaced by other crises. Meanwhile, the same songs continue to play through the same speakers, and another generation of children learns to bow before they learn to speak. Every year that passes without action deepens the void, allowing the illusion to thrive. Some argue that the problem is unsolvable, that intervention would only provoke greater suffering. But that argument serves comfort more than truth. The children in those institutions do not need slogans or sympathy. They need to be seen. They need to be remembered. Because as long as they remain invisible, the system remains invincible. Imagine, for a moment, one of those children, 6 years old, standing barefoot on a cold cement floor, staring at a portrait of a man she's never met. Her stomach aches, her fingers tremble, but she still bows because she must, because that's what good children do. But in her mind, there's a flicker, a question she cannot voice. Why must I love someone who never loved me? That question, silent and small, is what dictators fear most, because it is the first crack in the wall. Years later, that same child might find herself across the river, under a foreign sky, realizing for the first time that she is free. And in that moment, everything she was told collapses. The propaganda, the songs, the fear, it all falls away, and what remains is raw humanity. She might cry, she might scream, or she might simply stand in silence, overwhelmed by the sound of her own heartbeat. That sound, the pulse of an unbroken self, is the beginning of truth. The truth about North Korea's orphanages is not confined to borders. It's a reflection of what happens when a society decides that power matters more than compassion, when love becomes a threat to control. It's a mirror the world often avoids because it forces us to ask difficult questions. How many silences do we accept in our own lives? How many children in how many nations are taught to fear instead of dream? The tragedy of North Korea is extreme, but its roots are universal. Wherever power demands worship, childhood becomes collateral. Still, within that darkness, there are lights, faint but real. Small networks of defectors working to smuggle information across borders. Radio programs broadcasting uncensored stories into the north. Anonymous donors funding secret escape routes for children. They are the unseen heroes of this story, fighting a war of truth against an empire of lies. Every rescued child, every smuggled message, every whispered prayer chips away at the myth of invincibility that the regime clings to. And what of those who never escape? What of the thousands still inside, still bowing, still hungry, still unseen? For them we speak, because to speak is to break the silence that imprisons them. To remember is to deny their erasure. They may not know our names, but the act of witness, this act, reaches them, even if only as a ripple of awareness in the dark. There will come a day when the walls crumble, when the portraits fall, when the doors of those orphanages open not for propaganda but for sunlight. And on that day the world will be forced to confront what it ignored. The faces of the survivors will not look angry. They will look bewildered, wondering how so many could have known and done so little. But until that day, the story continues to unfold in silence. Children wake before dawn. The siren sounds. The songs begin again. Their voices rise in unison, pure and steady, unaware that they are singing for ghosts. They sing of love they have never felt, of gratitude they do not understand. And yet, somewhere in those harmonies, beneath the fear and indoctrination, there is still a trace of humanity, a note of longing, faint but real. That note travels farther than any border. It crosses rivers, mountains, and mines. It reaches the ears of those who will listen, and the conscience of those who cannot forget. It is the sound of truth, the quiet rebellion of survival. And as long as that sound exists, as long as one voice in that darkness still dares to imagine a different life, the regime has not won. Because love, once remembered, cannot be unlearned. Because silence, once broken, can never fully return. Because even in the most forbidden places on earth, the human spirit continues to whisper the same ungovernable truth, that every child deserves to be held, not controlled, seen, not used, loved, not feared. That is the dark truth about North Korea's orphanages, not merely the cruelty of what is done, but the unbearable beauty of what refuses to die. The quiet defiance of children who, even without knowing the word, still dream of freedom. The final song of a generation born in captivity, yet destined somehow to remind the world what it means to be human. The documentary fades to black. The last sound is not the anthem, nor the siren, but the distant murmur of children's voices carried by wind, echoing through the barbed fences, whispering into eternity.